I'm often confronted by people who criticize fasting because they say your body needs food and sustenance every day. And many people are raised with the idea, if I don't eat every day, I'm going to die. And that's probably because parents feel if the child don't eat, the child is sick. If the child eats, they're not sick. And it is true that very often people stop eating when they are depressed, because depressed people don't develop as much of appetite. But because we're being brainwashed, that's why depressed people to eat all the time. They want to satisfy their parents so they can feel better in themselves. Now, how long can you live without food? There's two on record in this world who lived more than 300 days without eating anything. The one was a Scotsman that did 383 days. I read about him first in 1977 when I was studying medicine, and I couldn't find the article again. It's been recently republished. He's still doing very well. He's regained about 10 kilograms or so, and he's quite healthy. And then they mentioned a 385-day fast. I couldn't get more information on that. The longest I've supervised at Hoogland was 45 days of zero food intake. This guy, I remember when he came here, we had to put a chair on the path as he walked down to reception, because every 5 meters he had to sit and catch his breath. So when I told him eventually, listen, you don't need to eat today or tomorrow. He said, but I'm coming from that, it was in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, and they told me I had to eat every day. They told me I had a metabolic block. I can intake energy, but I can't burn all of it. So for each few hours I had to put in more, and there's always a little bit left over. Now energy that's left over in your body turns into fat, because fat is the most concentrated energy. Protein and carbohydrate, which actually is the same thing metabolically, they provide about 17 kilojoules per gram. I say they're metabolically the same because for you to get energy out of protein, you have to turn it back to carbohydrate. That unfortunately releases ammonia, and ammonia is toxic. That is why people on a high protein diet often lose weight, because they toxins in their system all the time. One of the biggest tragedies of the Second World War was when one of these Jewish concentration camps were liberated, and the Allies said, well, these poor hungry people, let's give them something to eat. They gave them meat, and dozens upon dozens died the same night from ammonia poisoning, because the body was breaking down. It was used to breaking down whatever it gets, and broke down the protein too quickly. Fat contains twice as much energy per weight. It contains 35 kilojoules of energy. So when you're fasting, number one, you don't have to spend a lot of energy on digestion. You have much more energy left for your body to sustain itself. What was the topic?
Why do you get, well, what I was wondering is why you get sick.
You feel sick, okay.
You were talking about the Eastern Bloc guy and battling when he arrived at 45 days.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
The guy with the 45. You can splice all of these things, right? Now this guy came in here, he didn't eat anything for 45 days. At the end of 45 days, I found him top of the hill taking the walks, and the other people had trouble keeping up. So I checked what's going on. He said, well, when I arrived here, I had this high cholesterol, I had heart failure, I had some asthma, and I had pronounced diabetes. And now, after 45 days, blood pressure was normally lost 45 kilograms in the first 45 days. And he got rid of the extra fat, he got rid of the built-up poisons. His heart had to pump for 45 kilograms less of body, and the heart got rid of the fat that infiltrated between the heart muscles. So the heart muscles was much more supple, and therefore the pulse pressure, that's the difference between systolic and diastolic, between the heart contracting and the heart relaxing. That came down a lot, which indicated the muscles in the arterial walls was much more supple, and they could give way. The function of the muscles in the arterial walls is when the heart contracts, they stretch, And when the heart relaxes to keep the blood flowing, the blood vessels close down. If they are not flexible enough, the blood pressure goes high during the contraction and low in between. So we see these calcifications and hardenings reverse themselves. Another really success story is a lady who came here from a neighboring country a few years ago. She was severely diabetic, overweight, high blood pressure. It was type 2 diabetes, which is not supposed to need insulin, but we know if you don't look after it well, after a while you have to inject more and more and more insulin to get the sugar out of the blood. So when you test it, you feel, okay, my blood sugar is normal. But where did that sugar go? It went into the cells that didn't want it. Why the cells didn't want it? Because they were already full. It was discovered recently, 2 or 3 years ago, that we always thought diabetics or diabetes develops because the cells lose the receptor. The receptor, the insulin receptor, takes the sugar in the blood and environment and pumps it into the cell. So we devised medicines that makes these receptors more active, so it pumps more sugar into the cell. So what we measure can look normal, and then we think we've served the patient a good purpose. But now there's more and more and more sugar in the cells. What does the body do? It turns it into fats to store it. But the cell itself tries to protect it from this oversupply of sugar by retracting this little pump, this little insulin receptor into the cell. And this was a really brilliant Japanese physiologist that was able to train an electron microscope into the inside of a living cell. And notice there's the receptors. They didn't get lost. We thought it was an autoimmune disease that kills these receptors. At the moment you stop eating, you use up that sustenance inside the cell, and then the cell asks for sugar again, so that receptor pops up back to the surface. So this young lady came here. She was only 78 at the stage, very overweight, 150 kilograms, very diabetic, couldn't walk more than a few yards, had to inject insulin 3-4 times a day, plus oral medication. Now I told her, please just stop eating for a day. And the first time, she didn't quite take the bait. She went home, came back a little later, lost 10 kilograms at 140. So she said, now I thought about it, I'm going to do the fast. And she did some here, lost 5 or 6 kilograms in the next week, went back home. And then she developed this new eating habit, which suited her. She would not eat anything other than water Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then she would eat one meal a day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Then Sunday she'll invite the family and they have a splash out. And then again Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, nothing. Incidentally, she wrote to me a week ago. She's now 85 kilograms. She has no sign of diabetes. She stopped the insulin during a previous visit here and never needed it again. She stopped all medication about a year ago. And we recently measured her hemoglobin A1C. Now those of you who know, hemoglobin carries the oxygen. If there's too much sugar in the blood, it binds to the hemoglobin, and then we call it hemoglobin A1C because it sounds very impressive, and then it cannot carry oxygen. So the normal is under about 5.5 millimole per mole. And hers was about 10 to 12, which is very high. And that in spite of the medicine and the injections, etc. I measured hers when she was back here. It was 5.5, after not having touched a diabetic medicine or insulin for at least a year. So we know diabetes is reversible, but you have to create the need for sugar in your cells. And the only way you do it is by stop supplying it. When you stop supplying it, the cells ask for it, and it will take it from your blood as needed. Unfortunately, some people wait too long. And indeed, if the insulin receptors are retracted, in time they do disappear. But your body makes 3 million new cells in a second. Those new cells may still have the insulin receptors. So by turnover over a period of time, you may be able to survive that also. Unfortunately, the other complication is the poor pancreas. Whenever it sees a high blood sugar, it blames itself. It says, I didn't make enough insulin. So it starts making more and more and more. Now the normal or the maximum level of insulin in the blood I measured in this laboratory is about 17 millimole per liter. I've measured one at 170, 10 times as much. I often measure them at 20s, 30s, 40s. Then I know the poor pancreas has a guilt feeling and it makes more and more to get the blood sugar down. If you simply fast and the blood sugar goes down anyway, the pancreas say, okay, I no longer have to make this volume of insulin. If, however, it continues to make too much, it burns out until it can no longer make it. And diabetologists all over the world says, oh, this is the natural cause of the disease. You know, you come to us, initially we'll tell you to diet. Then when that stops working, we'll give you pills, and when that stops working, we'll give you insulin injections, and that is a normal way to deal with diabetes. I believe there's a better way. We need to get to our ideal weight. Every person in this world has a weight threshold at which you will develop diabetes. If your weight threshold is 500 kilograms, you're not going to get it. If your threshold is 40 kilograms, you're going to have it forever. But most people's threshold is reasonably close to their ideal weight. So just dropping a few kilograms often resolves this thing. But that weight threshold comes down throughout your life, which means from roughly the age of 40, your weight has to come down every year to remain within that threshold. If you demand too much insulin from your pancreas, it burns out. Right? It's like running your car at full revs and not adding any oil to it. It's going to seize. And then you do need the injections. There's no getting away from that. Although I've seen a few instances here where people don't make enough insulin, partly because of the biofeedback. We inject insulin, so the pancreas has no more stimulus to make it. And then it gets lazy. It's like a muscle that hasn't exercised for a long time. If a muscle is not exercised, it withers away. So if the pancreas doesn't have to make insulin, it gets lazy and it withers away. That holds for so many things in our health in general. The more of a medicine we take, the more dependent we get on it. You know that, for example, sleep medicine, they work for the first 2 or 3 weeks. Then your body forgets how to sleep. And then you're dependent on it. Without it, you can't sleep. If there's any person listening to me now who wants a headache, do you know how you can get a headache? Take headache pills for 3 weeks, you will have a headache, because you upset the balance between your endorphins, your irisin, and a variety. Irisin has more to do with sugar, but your body makes endorphins when you exercise, and they suppress pain. Endorphin, the closest we can make to it in the laboratory, is an extract from plants called morphine. Right, when we talk about a phenomenon called homeostasis, have you noticed when it's hot, you sweat to cool down. When it's cold, you shiver to heat up. Incidentally, you know that shivering burns more calories than any exercise you can do, because you need to heat up your body. It's a relatively inefficient way of burning fat, because you want to make more heat rather than movement. But the same holds for pain. If you really want a headache, just swallow a headache pill every day, few times, and within 3 weeks you'll have a headache. If you want insomnia, take a sleeping pill for 3 weeks and you will be insomniac, because your body strives towards homeostasis. If I make you hot, you sweat to get cold. If I make you cold, you shiver to get hot. All of those means your body aims for a balance. If we give too much of something, your body makes less of it. If we give you too little of it, your body makes more of it, and it suppresses the elimination of it. which perhaps may explain why the only people I've ever found to have meaningful vitamin deficiencies are people who take supplements. Vitamin supplements stimulate your kidneys to eliminate it and reduce the absorption in time. That's why, like my professor in chemical pathology put it so eloquently, he said, these supplements gives you expensive urine and valuable sewage water, but extra taxes to get all the hyacinths of Hartbeespoort Dam that grows on that elimination of yours. We have only one real source of nutrition, and that is what grows in nature. You can't put diesel in a petrol car, you can't put petrol in a diesel car. You have to have compatible technologies. Natural food grown without too much interference is the same technology as our bodies. Food that's been processed in factories is not the same technology. Whenever you consider putting something in your mouth, look at it with an open, intelligent mind and tell yourself your entire body is going to be replaced atom for atom over the next 5 years. That what you put in your mouth now is what your body is going to become. Look at it and say, is this what I want to become? All food starts as chlorophyll. Chlorophyll binds sunlight and carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. That carbohydrates get added nitrogen to become protein. It links together in long chains to become fat. And everything starts there. So I like to refer to steps from light. Sunlight or chlorophyll makes your primary food, and every following food is a secondary, tertiary, quaternary, etc. food. The bulk of food on planet Earth is made by the chlorophyll in plankton. Plankton is eaten by krill, is eaten by shrimp, is eaten by little fish, is eaten by big fish, is turned into fish meal and fed to the chickens, of which the waste is fed to the cattle. And then by the time you eat the muscles of the cattle, it's been eaten about 20 times, which means each step adds toxicity and subtracts nutrition, which is why we should eat things, if I ever will to eat meat again. It will be one of the eland or wildebeest that I hunted myself, because I know the only thing they've eaten was grass, not severely processed stuff. The same with medicine. Every medicine has a tendency to create a problem it relieves, because it pushes your body in one way. Your body desperately wants to get to homeostasis, it push the other way. That's why anti-inflammatories causes inflammation. You suppress the prostaglandins that your body made. Now, the function of the prostaglandins is to localize the inflammation so your immune system can deal with it. And that gives you pain. You hurt your elbow, it hurts to move it. Why? So that it can stand still so your body can repair it. What do? We give you some drugs that take the pain away so you can keep on moving it, and then it becomes like a motor car where you don't shut down the engine so you can't service it. It keeps on running. In Mother Nature, when you have pain, you stop moving. If you are sick, you stop eating. If there's danger, you stop sleeping. Now, for example, the stop sleeping thing, you know what happens when you stop sleeping? Your right brain becomes dominant more and more and more. Now, your right brain is the creative part of your brain. It can look for solutions in less obvious places, where often is where the solution is. Makes me think of the guy that was chased up a tree by a pack of lions, and he hung to that branch. And the pack of lions was at the bottom of the tree. So his friends found him in the tree after a few weeks. They say, how did you sustain yourself? He said, well, I was awake for 2 nights and then I became very creative. And I saw there's a little shop down the road. And whenever the lions went for a drink at the river, I quickly ran to the shop and got my food, and I was back up the tree before they got back. So you see how creative you can start thinking. I've seen happens at Hoogland, there's two things that make you think creatively. One is the ketones. The ketones relaxes your brain. Ketones is what formed from fat when you're fasting. Because when there's been famine for a while, our ancestors needed to think more creatively. And one of the things that happens, or the two things that happens, fat breakdown and staying awake. So when people come to Hoogland and they're very stressed, and I tell them, please stop eating for a while, they say, well, if I'm not eating, I can't sleep. I say, yes, that's because your body makes all the things that increase your blood sugar. Adrenaline and noradrenaline, dopamine, cortisone, and a lot of these things. And sometimes they keep you awake. So after a few days, you haven't had much sleep and you're running on ketones. And then people would come to me in the morning and said, you know, that thing I thought was an insoluble problem, I woke up with a solution. Where did it come from? And part of that also comes from the fact that people tend to focus on their problem all the time. And when you focus on your problem, you can't really think holistically. Whenever we create a new problem, we create hunger and thirst and hot and cold, the things that threatened our ancestors' survival. Then the body focuses on that. And the civilized problems, if I like to call it that, is renegated into the subconscious mind. But when you look at the neurology of the brain, the bulk of it functions in the subconscious. Subconscious is very intelligent. It can really bring together a lot of different factors, like a dream. A dream brings together memories from long ago and ideas from long ago, and it can look at many things together because it's not distracted by what you hear and see and taste and smell because you're unconscious. And then it can really integrate all these inputs, and suddenly you wake up with a solution. That's why there's this old English proverb, I have to sleep on it. How often do you find that you solve it when you sleep? Incidentally, the sleep's a lot better if you've been awake for 2 or 3 nights beforehand, because then you are in total right brain dominance when you're asleep. And your poor hippocampus is so full of memories, it just shuts down the rest of your consciousness. Everybody, of course, knows what the hippocampus is. It's, the name comes from seahorse. It's a little structure in your brain that looks like a seahorse. Everything you experience right now is stored there. It's a little bit like the RAM, the random access memory of your computer. What happens to the memory in the random access if suddenly there's a power failure? You can kick yourself for not having saved it, isn't it? You save your memory when you sleep. That's why most really efficient people sleep 2 or 3 times a day, not once at night. Actually, none of our ancestors slept 1 episode per night. Some of them went to sleep early and woke up early. Others went to sleep late and woke up late. And the reason for that is this poor little tribe always had to have a lookout. If everybody slept at the same time, the enemy would have overrun them. Some people sleep 5 times a day, 2 or 3 times at night and 2 or 3 times in the day. And some people sleep equal volumes right around the clock. Which is why at Hoogland we try not to do things on time. There's no meal times, there's no bed times, there's no specific times, as far as possible for everything. So people can become totally spontaneous in interacting with their own bodies. When you make them hungry and thirsty and cold and hot, they interact with the physical body. So most of the stresses in our modern world is not physical. I mean, your body cannot solve your bank overdraft by running. Right? You have to think about it. But you can't think about it if you're full of stress, because when you have stress, your body believes there's physical danger, so it partly shuts down your brain. Have you ever found you get stopped by a speed cop, you get a ticket, and when you drive off half a mile further, you suddenly think of a nice excuse. And why didn't I think about it at that stage? That's because stress shuts down your intelligence, because it focuses on the fight or flight response. You need to survive the cause of the stress, And our bodies, being of a natural origin, knows only about the stresses that comes from nature. Hunger and thirst and predators and thunder and lightning and lack of shelter. So that's what your mind focuses on when you have stress. Stress is not bad for you. It helps you think. But too much of it makes you focus on only the physical. And how you get it to focus back on the intelligence is by exercise. When you run, you make endorphins and irisin. This goes to your brain and it tells your brain, don't worry, I've escaped the predator, or I won this fight. That's why I'm sitting still now. So the body says, yes, wonderful. Now I can restart the digestive system. This lockdown nonsense. They want to restart the economy at some stage. Everything's been shut down. That's what happens when your body's under stress. Your intelligence shuts down, your kidneys shuts down, your pancreas shuts down. Only your muscles get activated. Even your skin shuts down. Have you seen how pale people get when they have stress? They shut down to reroute all your energy to your muscles for the fight or flight response. When they get back those signals from the muscles, I did exercise and I have now stopped. It says, phew, now we can reopen the economy. And you can send the blood back to the stomach and back to the gut and back to everything. You shouldn't ever eat while stressed. Actually, you shouldn't eat ever when you're hungry. You should first destroy the hunger with, say, a snack or something, so that when you eat, you don't eat for the hunger, you eat for the enjoyment and the nutrients that your body guides you towards. Mum always told you, don't eat before meal times because you're going to lose your appetite. Now, when I look around me in the Western world, most people need to lose their appetite. So there are different ways of doing that. Remember, from the moment you eat until the sugar arrives in your blood can be 2 hours. So people tend to eat until they're full. That fills the stomach. It's not what your body needs. It's very often what your mind needs. It's very often what your habits need. It's very often a physical filling instead of a chemical filling as it should be. So bottom line is, our bodies was inherited from a long process in nature, not in civilization, not in theory. And if we want to see what is right for our bodies, goes back to the way our ancestors adapted to their environment. Their environment did not include sleeping at a certain time, eating at a certain time, eating what mother and father told you, eating a variety at a time. They typically ate one food at a time. When they were successful in the hunt, they would eat meat. They won't eat vegetables with meat because the vegetable can be stored, the meat can't. What did our ancestors eat? If they're successful in the hunt, they would eat meat until the meat is gone, because the meat cannot be stored without refrigerators. Our ancestors didn't have refrigerators. If it's peach season, they would eat peaches. If it's banana season, they'll eat bananas. If it's apple season, they'll eat apples. If they come across a grove of strawberries, they'll eat strawberries. And then that allows your digestive system to adapt its pH and its digestive enzymes and its movement, everything, it adapts to the food you eat. Now we've come across this idea of a balanced diet, and people say we need to balance that diet every meal. That is not true. It never happened until very recently in our history. We typically eat one at a time. Now, I've noticed, and research have shown, that the human being with a reasonable nutritional status can go for 40 days without food. So if your diet is balanced over a 40-day period, it's balanced. Because you can have this vitamin now, you can have that vitamin then, you can have these proteins now, you can have those carbohydrates then, and your body can store whatever you've had. I've never seen a person come off harm by having a mono-food diet, meal per meal, one food per meal. But there's a reason why we eat a variety. It goes about what goes on above your eyes. Social interaction, enjoyment, habit, very often your conscience, because you were raised that way. You were raised the way you have to lose consciousness one time every night. You've been raised to say you have to eat 3 times a day. I don't have a clue where 3 comes from. What's wrong with 1? What's wrong with 5? And variety, they say, is the spice of life. So why should you do the same thing every day? Why should you get up at the same time every day? Why do we gain consciousness when the sun is in the east? Then we put food down our throat when the sun is above the horizon. Then we put liquid down our throat when it's halfway in between. Then we put food down our throat when it's middle of the day. Then we put liquid down our throat when it's halfway to sunset. Then we put food down our throat when it's sunset. Then we lose consciousness. Then we gain consciousness. Then we put food down our throat when the sun rises. Then we put food down our throat halfway in between. Then we put food down our throat middle of the day. Then we put food down our throat towards the middle, and then we put food down our throat at the end of the day. We lose consciousness and we gain consciousness. Isn't that boring? Can you remember every night that you've slept? Can you remember every day that you've eaten? I would say no. Can you remember the nights that you didn't sleep? Can you remember the nights that you didn't, the days that you didn't eat? Those contribute to the richness of memory that you can thrive on in your later days. Do things, experience things that are new, that are novel, so that you build a beautiful memory to savor in your later years.